Welcome to the 14th episode of the God and Game Theory podcast, where you learn how to break free from the shackles of this world, because heaven on earth can be found, and that's why I am here to help you find it. My name is Tom Peterson, and I'm so excited to have you here with me today. Because in this video, I'm going to be discussing how God's divine and sacred knowledge escaped from the hands of his chosen and birthed the many secret societies, religions, and occults that we know of today. So stick around, because in this video you will come to know and understand how Gnosticism, Talmudic Judaism, and black magic came to be. And just as a reminder, given the universal law of divine polarity, Satan cannot create, but he can steal, hijack, distort, and weaponize God's sacred and divine knowledge and utilize it for his own evil endeavors. So let's get right into it. Before we start, I do want to mention something, and I'm going to describe this now because this applies to this video as well. There was a statement that Jacob made, and I apologize. In the last video, I said Isaac. So it was Jacob talking to his sons, not Isaac. I apologize for that. If you caught that, good for you. You were paying attention. But Jacob had his sons before he passed, more or less in the room together. And he talked to them about what he expected of them, given his knowledge of who they were and kind of his prophetic knowledge of what the future would look like. And so he described his sons Levi and Simeon as this. And I'll just share this with you again. I mentioned this in the last video, but this applies to this one as well. They are men of violence and injustice. Let me read that again. They are men of violence and injustice. Stay away from them. May I never be a party to their wicked plans. And as you recall in the last video, I was struggling with Moses and Aaron, trying to kind of figure out why he would say this about Levi, obviously, who Moses and Aaron were Levites. Okay, they were descendants of Levi, the tribe of Levi. So I think I've kind of cracked the code on this one, perhaps. I hope so. Give me your thoughts on this once you see the video. I would like to hear your input. And if you have anything else to share that you may know that I don't, please feel free to share it. Or if you have another viewpoint or something else you'd like to maybe have me consider, please feel free to share it. I always love to hear those comments. And also, if you have any questions, let me know. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the biblical family tree. And I'm going to have to read off my notes because there's a lot to cover, and I don't want to stray off course or forget something, so bear with me. But I want to follow up with Solomon, because this is incredibly important. So we know that Solomon's father, David, was an amazing king. Matter of fact, he was so amazing that because of David, God granted Solomon the position of king as David's son. And he also was very incredibly lenient based on any descendants of David, given his love for David because he was so proud of him. And really, David was a pretty amazing king during his time. But what happened was it was passed on to the kingdom of Israel, if you will, which included Israel and Judah at the time. He passed it on to David's son, Solomon. And Solomon, initially turned out to be a pretty good guy. And there's something that he requested of God, and I'm going to share the scripture with you on that real quick. So this is going to 1 Kings 3:5 through 14. Now in 1 Kings is pretty much the book that starts discussing the kings themselves, and kind of goes through the chronological order of things that took place. Now the beautiful thing about Solomon is what he asked from God, because most kings would probably ask something other than this, but you have to give him credit for his wish. So the Lord, and I'm going back to again, like I said, 1 Kings 3:5. The Lord appeared to him in a dream that night and told him to ask for anything he wanted, and it would be given to him. So Solomon replied, "You are wonderfully kind to my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you," and he was. And he obeyed your commands, and you have continued your kindness to him by giving him a son to succeed him. Now, this is Solomon's request of God. Give me an understanding mind so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. It's very interesting he's saying this as we get further along. For who by himself is able to carry such a heavy responsibility? So the Lord was pleased with his reply and was glad that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So he replied, because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people and haven't asked for a long life or riches for yourself or the defeat of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wiser mind than anyone else has ever had or will ever have. And I will also give you what you didn't ask for, riches and honor. And no one in all the world will be as rich and as famous as you for the rest of your life. And I will give you a long life if you follow me and obey my laws, as your father David did. Well, things started out pretty well. Solomon reigned, and things were good while he reigned. There was peace, there was prosperity. Everybody seemed to get along. He actually had great allies. These constant wars and battles and so on and so forth were just, non-existent for the most part. Everything was very cool, calm, and collected. And so, he received many gifts from God. Now, when he asked for wisdom, the Bible in that particular verse doesn't describe or go into the many gifts that he was given, but I'll go over those with you here. And, what he had been given, which allowed him to be so wise, was really sacred knowledge that he entrusted Solomon with. And so Israel and Judah were peaceful and plentiful, and he actually completed the first temple, which was prophesied by God that he would. God said to David that your son will build the first temple, and he did. He carried through on that and made it happen. But he made a really big mistake. So this is the big mistake that he made. He married outside of the tribes of Judah and Israel. Now, if you've watched my prior videos, this is something I've repeated time and time again, because God has said this time and time again to the Israelites, don't be marrying from these other tribes, especially those that are evil and, practice the worshiping of other gods, which God really despised. So what did he go and do? Well, he married an Egyptian princess to start. That's probably bad enough as it is, because we know about the Egyptians based on the prior videos. But on top of that, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So he was a very busy man when it comes to his wives. I don't know how you managed to do that, but he somehow, some way did. But this is the real problem. His wives came from the tribes of Moab, Edom, so it's the Moabites, the Edomites, which we talked about in the last video. Those were very, very specific, in terms of to stay away from. And then Sidon and the Hittites. The Hittites were another one to stay away from. And so what happened was, over time, he began to worship their gods and to worship their idols. And it got so bad that he actually had built altars for them. Let's see, what else did he do? Temples he built so they could worship and sacrifice, even sacrifice to their own heathen gods. So this is something that, obviously God was very disappointed in. And it was a horrible thing, because God had given Solomon sacred wisdom and knowledge. He entrusted him with that. And because of the fact that he married these women, he had these wives that worshiped these heathen gods, unfortunately, his sacred and divine knowledge ended up getting into the wrong hands. So it was during this time that those sacred gifts were shared with his wives and their gods. Now, one of which was something called the divine template. Now, this included the 72 spirits. And I'll go into this. There's something called the Goetia. And so this knowledge was shared with him. These are 72 spirits that can be used for good, which Solomon did use them for good initially. But what happened was those spirits then fell into the wrong hands, and then they started to use them for bad. And I'll get into that a little bit further here in a minute. He also had angels that were bound by a divine ring that he wore, and that was given to Solomon by the archangel Michael. So not only did God provide him with gifts, but he also had angels provide him with gifts. And these were incredibly sacred and divine gifts that should never fall into the hands of the enemy, so to speak. But they did. And so this is what happened. And this is it's extraordinary because, when we consider where does this divine knowledge come from that gets utilized by Satan and his armies. Again, God creates everything. Satan hasn't created any of this. He just stole it. And this, was this theft in this particular case? I don't know. I can't really say. But the fact of the matter is, it went from Solomon's hands into the hands of others, and that should have never happened. So this divine knowledge is then woven into Gnostic teachings, which we'll get into, as well as Jewish texts, especially Babylonian, the Babylonian Talmud, okay, and other texts that I'll tell you about here in a minute. But also the secret societies use the Gnostic faith, the Gnostic beliefs, a lot of sacred knowledge in the secret societies. And then also, of course, black magic uses this as well. So this is what happens. And this goes back to the universal law of divine polarity. So when you're in the universal law of divine polarity, if you're in that realm, you obviously have the light to the dark. You have what's called the positive side of the pole and the negative side of the pole. Now it's also referred to the left hand and the right hand. So when you acquire divine knowledge or you have access to divine knowledge, which hand do you use? And this again just kind of goes back to the universal law of divine polarity. In this context, it's referred to as the right hand, which is the hand that utilizes it for divine purposes. If it ends up in the left hand, then it's used for evil or satanic purposes. So just to give you an idea, a right hand path, would be something that would be specific with the union with God, union with divinity. You would use the sacred knowledge for good. It would be for God's purposes. And Solomon did use it for good. He used it for God's purposes for a time. But then the problem is it fell into the evil or the dark or the negative side. And because of that, it fell into the left hand. And so when it falls into the left hand, this is called a left hand path. And that is a separation from the divine. Okay, and so what happens there is it's the exaltation of self, which is essentially Gnosticism. So that's where Gnosticism comes from, which means you become divine through one's own knowledge, not through God and his divine knowledge. You essentially hijack his knowledge and you use it to put yourself in God's position and eliminate God from the equation. And that goes back to Gnosticism. So let's talk about the Adam and Eve story again, because this just keeps coming up because it's such a great story and applies so much to so much of this. So, when we talk about the definition of gnosis or Gnosticism, it's defined as secret or experiential knowledge. Okay, it's all about the knowledge. But the key is that it liberates the individual. It's knowledge that liberates the individual from the oppressor. So what happened in the story of Adam and Eve is God told Eve, you can have anything you want, just don't have the fruit of the tree. Satan comes and says, hey, that guy over there is the oppressor because he doesn't want you to have the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Don't listen to him because you can be God, you can become God in your own right and be liberated by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Hence Gnosticism. And so that's this just goes back to everything that, from day one, when we talk about how do we align ourselves with God. Well, we are obedient, right? And then we also are respectful of his wishes. And so in that particular case, Satan convinced Eve to not be respectful of God's wishes and to liberate herself by ignoring his request. And so she took the fruit of the tree. And of course, then she fell into sin. But Satan had convinced her that it would be liberation because she would have all of the divine sacred wisdom and knowledge that God at that point in time was not ready to share with her. So that's how Gnosticism came to be, and a lot of other things. So let me talk about how this works as well. There's not something called masquerading, and I want to show this to you real quick. I just want to explain this to you, because this goes back to the universal law of divine polarity. And so there are, again, a lot of different weapons that Satan can utilize, but there's one called masquerading as the positive pole. And so that's where Satan implies or tells you that something is on the positive side of the pole when it's actually on, it's not, but it's masqueraded as such. So let me just read this to you. The ultimate deception. He will present himself as the embodiment of the light pole. Okay, so the positive side of the pole, the light pole, the right hand. Lucifer, the light bearer. Okay, so that's the false light bearer, while actually serving the destructive underside. Many esoteric and occult movements have fallen for this. Groups that believe they are accelerating human evolution through transgression, chaos magic, or even transhumanism don't realize that they are amplifying the destructive pole under the guise of liberation. So this goes back to all of these things that are related to Gnosticism and inversion, or reversing the polarity of the poles via, fooling us via the masquerading. So I just want to talk to you about that a little bit because, the Gnostic and occult structures utilize this as their strategy. This is what they're based on. Even the secret societies utilize this as their strategy. And so this is how this all came to be. And it's very, very interesting. Now, one more thing I want to get into here on that, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything, is since Solomon had done this, God became quite angry because he knew what obviously had happened, or what was going to happen once Solomon started, intermixing with the others and started worshiping their gods and all of that. He knew that unfortunately this sacred knowledge would then more than likely fall into the wrong hands, which it did. So then God said, "Hey, look, I'm done with you. I'm gonna be taking the kingdom from your son. I'm not going to take it from you because of my vow to David, but I will be taking it from your son." And so he did. And so I want to read to you this verse here, which is 1 Kings 11:9-13. We can kind of see how this whole thing went down because of what Solomon had done. Okay, so 11:9-13. So Jehovah was very angry with Solomon about this. For now Solomon was no longer interested in the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice to warn him specifically against worshiping other gods. But he hadn't listened. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept our agreement and have not obeyed my laws, I will tear the kingdom away from you and your family and give it to someone else. However, for the sake of your father David, I won't do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son. And even so, I will let him be king of one tribe, for David's sake, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city." So what happened there is the tribes were split up. So we go here. Now here's Solomon. Here's his wives that he intermixed with, right? All of the red, as I've explained before, the red is Satan's side, Satan's armies, if you will. So then what happened is Israel gets separated over here. This is the 10 tribes over here. And then you have Judah over here that he left to Solomon's son. Now keep in mind, Judah and Benjamin, so there's really 3 tribes here in a sense, but not really. So there were 13 tribes, right? Judah, really Benjamin was kind of incorporated into Judah for the most part, but you could say it was Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites. So that would be the 3 over here, the tribes. He calls it one tribe, the tribe of Judah, because he didn't really consider the Levites a tribe per se. They were just more or less the priests at that point. They weren't so much a tribe. And like I said, Benjamin had been kind of, enveloped or morphed into Judah there. And that was because of Jerusalem. So he wanted, this tribe over here. The rest of the tribes went over to here. Obviously, the southern kingdom of Israel and the northern kingdom of Israel with the capital of Samaria, and then the southern kingdom of Judah with the capital of Jerusalem. And so that's how the whole split came to be. Now, the interesting thing is, these 10 tribes were given to Jeroboam. Now, he was the king of the new Israel. Okay, and then the other tribe was left to Solomon's son, which is Rehoboam, and that became the new Judah. Now, then centuries passed, and evil kings came and went, as usual, and battles were commonplace. A lot had changed then. It was kind of back to the usual, lots of fighting, lots of battles. Just didn't have the calm, peaceful benefit that it had when Solomon was there. Because Israel and Judah continued to rebel against God as well as one another, while the kings led them to sin and the worship of other gods. And this also includes the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. And I talked to you about that in the last video about Jonathan, who was responsible for the golden calves, which the tribe of Dan was worshiping. Okay, the tribe of Dan is over here. So, here we have, they're just going back to the same old thing, right? They're going back to worshiping other gods, the heathen gods. Nothing really has changed, nothing new under the sun, right? And just as it was prophesied, Israel was besieged by the Assyrians. And most of the people were exiled to Assyria and placed in colonies. Now, this is really interesting because God prophesied that, and he warned them. He had his prophets warn them, guys, get it together over here. Quit doing what I'm telling you not to do. Otherwise, you're going to get besieged by these guys, the bad guys. They're going to besiege you, and you're going to be exiled. So what happened was, 722 to 720 BC, they were exiled to Assyria. Now, these are the cities, mostly Halah, Habor, Medes, which is more of the northern Mesopotamia. So that, if you've ever studied this or looked at the maps, Mesopotamia is kind of the broad area that they all reside in, all of these different cities and tribes and what have you. And, there was the northern end, which is more or less where they were exiled to. Now, the interesting part about this is there were some that were left behind, the poor. Okay, so the Samaritans, that's where the Samaritans came from, Samaria. They pretty much left the poor behind, so they didn't all get exiled, but most of them did. And what happened here is something called a population exchange. So when the Israelites were exiled to Assyria, the interesting thing is those in Babylon were then exiled, migrated to Israel. So you had these people come out of there, and then you had these people go in there. And these people were mostly from Ava, Hamath, and Cuth, mostly from southern Mesopotamia. And a lot of these people came from tribes that had been conquered by the Babylonians. They weren't necessarily their own people. What they would do is conquer, tribes, and then they would just kind of circulate them. What they would do, a population exchange. So if we're pulling a bunch of people over here, well, we're going to fill it up with some people from somewhere else. And so that's kind of how that whole thing came to be with regard to what happened to Israel. Now, don't know if you know this or not, but the reason why this didn't happen simultaneously, because Judah, this group over here was just as guilty. no less guilty than the other group. But God was still holding out, because of David. Since David came from the tribe of Judah, God was still trying to hold out over here, hoping that they would get their crap together and quit, sacrificing and worshiping heathen gods. But in time, the same thing ended up happening to them. So let's just see if there's anything else here that I missed. Let's see here. Oh, yes. So this is what happened. Now, these colonies, they were placed in colonies. I told you where they were moved to. And then, of course, they had these migrants that were moved from Babylon over there. But this is what happened. They continued to worship their heathen gods. So let me get into that. I'm going to get into 2 Kings 17:5. And just share this with you. Now the land of Israel was filled with Assyrian troops for 3 years, besieging Samaria, the capital city of Israel. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell and the people of Israel were exiled to Assyria. They were placed in colonies in the city of Halah and along the banks of the Habor River in Gozan and among the cities of Medes. This disaster came upon the nation of Israel because the people worshipped other gods, thus sinning against the Lord their God, who had brought them safely out of their slavery in Egypt. They had followed the evil customs of the nations which the Lord had cast out from before them. But the people of Israel had also secretly done many things that were wrong, and they had built altars to other gods throughout the land. They had placed obelisks, I think that's right, and idols at the top of every hill and under every green tree. And they had burned incense to the gods of the very nations which the Lord cleared out of the land when Israel came in. So the people of Israel had done many evil things, and the Lord was very angry. And yes, they worshipped idols, despite the Lord's specific and repeated warnings. He always gave warnings, just didn't seem to care. Again and again, the Lord had sent prophets to warn both Israel and Judah to turn from their evil ways. He had warned them to obey his commandments, which he had given to their ancestors through these prophets. But Israel wouldn't listen. The people were as stubborn as their ancestors and refused to believe in the Lord, their God. So that's how that happened. Now, as far as Judah's concerned, he delayed that as long as he could. But evil kings continued to reign, and God had finally had enough. So I'm just going to read to you what happened to Judah at that time. This is 2 Kings 21:11-15. Because King, I hope I get this right, Manasseh, I think that was how that's pronounced. I forgot to double check that, has done these evil things and is even more wicked than the Amorites who were in this land long ago. Can you believe that? They even topped those guys. And because he has led the people of Judah into idolatry, I will bring such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah that the ears of those who hear about it will tingle with horror. I will cause the kings to conquer Jerusalem, and I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipes a dish and turn it upside down to dry. Then I will reject even those few of my people who are left, and I will hand them over to their enemies, for they have done great evil and have angered me ever since I brought their ancestors from Egypt. And then I'm going to read one more to you. This is 24:2-4. And the Lord sent bands of Chaldeans, we'll get to those, Syrians, which are the Assyrians, Moabites, which, here we are, look at that, Moabites up here. Isn't that funny how those that he married now are the ones that are responsible for this over here? And the Ammonites, okay, which are, probably in there as well, against Judah in order to destroy the nation, just as the Lord had warned through his prophets that he would. It is clear that these disasters befell Judah at the direct command of the Lord. He had decided to wipe Judah out of his sight because of many sins of Manasseh, and he had filled Jerusalem with blood, and the Lord would not pardon it. So he finally had had enough. So what happened here is in 597 to 586 BC, we had the exile from Judah and Jerusalem to Babylon, and now I'm saying Babylon the second just because it's later. Okay, it's later in history. This was earlier in history. But this is the thing, Babylon is Babylon is Babylon. So it was always full of heathen gods, one of which was Marduk. Marduk was pretty much the main god of Babylon, for, I don't know, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Marduk was really the central god of Babylon. That was always kind of the thing that Babylon had, was Marduk as the god there. And so you have then these people that were in Babylon that already were worshiping heathen gods. They're still here worshiping heathen gods when those from Judah and Jerusalem are exiled here. And so the interesting thing is, we now have the Chaldeans, which I just read in Scripture, okay, which I mentioned in Scripture. These were at the top of the list of those who were going to come and besiege Judah and exile them to Babylon. So they were exiled to Babylon this time around. So this is the interesting thing about it, and this is well, I'll get to that here in a minute, but yeah. So the priests, elites, court officials, craftsmen, and warriors were exiled to Babylon because they were considered, the higher ups. They never really want the poor people, right? The poor people don't have a lot of value. They always want the higher ups because they feel that there's some, value that they're going to have by bringing them in. But they also brought in tens of thousands of others. Now, who were the Chaldeans exactly? Well, they were an offshoot of the Arameans, and they were essentially ruled by Amorite dynasties. So if you remember the Amorites, they're like top 5 on the list of enemies. They were essentially those who had more or less control over, these Chaldeans. And now they're called Arameans because they spoke Aramaic. Now, the priests and elites and scribes, essentially the Levites, right? So these are the priests, the elites, and the scribes. It's the Levites that fit into that category. They then lived among the most sophisticated magicians of the ancient world. Here, now. So what happened is they get exiled here. Look who's living here. The Chaldean priests, the priestly Chaldeans, who are the magicians and the sorcerers. So very interesting how you have the Levites end up here, and this is who they intermingle with. I'm going to share more with you on that here in a minute, because this is kind of what helped me to put the pieces together. Now, the other interesting thing is the Levites also learned Aramaic. Remember, they spoke Hebrew, but when they got here, they learned Aramaic because that's what the Chaldean priestly group utilized, was Aramaic for the language. So they came down here and they learned that language so they could then communicate with the Chaldeans and learn about their magic and sorcery. And here, I'm just going to give you an example of this. So let me read Daniel 2:1-2 real quick to you. One night in the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had a terrifying nightmare and awoke trembling with fear. And to make matters worse, now remember, he was the ruler of Babylon, okay? Right here, okay? This is when they were taken here and all of this was going on. And to make matters worse, he couldn't remember his dream. He immediately called in all of his magicians, sorcerers, and astrologers and demanded that they tell him what the dream had been. The Chaldeans, replied to the king, because they were the magicians and the sorcerers, "There isn't a man alive who can tell others what they have dreamed, and there isn't a king in all the world who would ask such a thing. This is an impossible thing the king requires. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they are not here to help." Isn't that interesting? All their gods just couldn't seem to help out a bit. Upon hearing this, the king was furious and sent out orders to execute all the wise men of Babylon. And that was until Daniel, which is why I'm reading the book of Daniel, came around. Now, Daniel had incredible wisdom, because he had the power of God within. He was, again, a prophet of God. So that's how he was able to do what the other magicians and sorcerers could not do. But these Chaldean priests were known for their temple magic and also practiced the forbidden knowledge from the Watchers. Now, if you've heard about the book of Enoch, those who descended from heaven, the fallen angels, so they shared their sacred and forbidden knowledge with humans, such as divination, magic, weaponry, and science. And remember, these are the fallen angels that had procreated with the women, the humans, and that's where the Nephilim came from, the giants. And that was essentially why we had the Great Flood, and God attempted to wipe them all out, because these were incredibly evil people who had taken, again, God's sacred and divine knowledge and shared it with many others and utilized it with the left hand. They utilized it against God because they were fallen angels. So from this, the Babylonian, this is crazy. So once this took place, this is when the Babylonian, hence the name Babylonian, the Babylonian Talmud originated. That's where it began to originate. That's where the whole thing began. And the Kabbalah. So you know about Kabbalah, which is the Jewish magic, sorcery, whatever you want to call it, Gnosticism, however you want to define that. But the Kabbalah came to life out of here from the Chaldeans. Okay, and remember, the Chaldeans essentially came from the Amorites. So here, this is just another old enemy, that was supposed to be eliminated a long time ago. And here they return to, again, do more work for Satan. So if we get on to this was very interesting to me. The Aaronite, Levite priests who were responsible. Now they were responsible for the exoteric Torah. Okay, so the Torah again is the first Judaic book, supposedly came directly from Moses. Supposedly it's the first 5 books of the Bible. I don't believe that for a second, but that's what we've been told. Then you have the Talmud. Okay, so those 2 books, among many others, came from the Aaronite Levites, the same tribe that Jacob said, "They are men of violence and injustice. Stay away from them. May I never be a party to their wicked plans." So here we are, this far down the line, we now see what he was referring to. We now understand what he was talking about. It was something that was driving me crazy. That's why I had to kind of search this out. I believe that's what he was talking about. They also created the magical texts such as the Merkabah and the Sword of Moses. Now these are Sword of Moses. Isn't that something that they name it after Moses? But these are teachings on how to force angels and demons to obey. The 12, 42, and 72 letter names from the Tetragrammaton, and this is a whole weird thing. When you try and figure out what this whole Tetragrammaton thing is, it's hard to get the truth. If anybody can share it with me, please do. Because the sources that I use just don't want to seem to uncover that. But the Tetragrammaton is used for opening of gates, resurrection, invisibility, and other illicit magic. Now, if we go back to the wisdom and the knowledge, the sacred gifts that God had given to Solomon, a lot of this same stuff applies. So we not only have sacred knowledge from the fallen angels, but we also have sacred knowledge that was given to Solomon. All of that was hijacked. It was stolen, and it was used here in Babylon for a very long period of time. And the Chaldeans, the priestly Chaldeans, were right there, very front and center in terms of this magic and sorcery that they were using via the left hand, using it for Satan's purposes. So then what happened from there? Well, God said the land must rest for 70 years, which it did. So if we go here to 590, let's just say if you round this up to 598, okay, BC, at 538 BC, this is when the Persians, okay, came and besieged Babylon from the Chaldeans. And remember, the Persians, interestingly enough, they are descendants of Japheth. Now, if you go back to the biblical family tree and you remember Noah's three sons, Ham and Japheth were the bad ones, right? So here we have the Persians, evil ones from Japheth, who weren't eliminated when a God wanted them to be. Here they come back to take Babylon from the other evildoers, the Chaldeans, which were essentially the Amorites. And then, of course, now they have their own gods because, see, when the Persians came and besieged Babylon, they had their own gods. And there's like a list of 10 of them. But what they did was they said, hey, it's okay. You guys can still worship your gods that you were already worshiping here in Babylon. We're not going to really, get into the way of that too much. So you can just keep worshiping Marduk and Nabu and Ishtar and all of these that you were worshiping before we ended up obliterating the place. So now by the time Babylon had been overtaken by King Cyrus, so this is King Cyrus here, the Persians, and this was 550 to 330. Now I'm trying to remember exactly when they overtook it. I didn't put that down here, but whatever the case, it wasn't shortly thereafter. I think it was. Well, anyways, it wasn't. It was shortly thereafter. So I apologize for not having that on there. But what happened was the Talmudic or Rabbinic Judaism was officially born at that point. Now they'll say that no, this was all, the Talmud didn't really come about until AC, but the reality is the oral Torah, which is the Talmud, claim that it came out of Moses' mouth. So it had been around. They just claim that it wasn't written down until, AD. But it was obviously something that was being practiced long before that. And so then the Jerusalem Talmud, there's two of them, the Jerusalem Talmud as well as the Babylonian Talmud came to be at this point in time. Here and here. It all took place right here. And then let's see. As prophesied, God spoke to Cyrus the king. Okay, so this is what happened next. God spoke to Cyrus the king, and the king only allowed the people from Judah, Benjamin, along with the Levites, to return to Jerusalem to build the second temple. No other tribes. I was always under the impression, because again, I just didn't know enough at the time. I was under the impression that they all came back, but they didn't. It was just the tribes here that were able to come back later once the Persians reigned here to build that second temple. So the tribes over here that went to Assyria, I guess what we refer to now as the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes, they never went back here to build the second temple. It was just those that had been sent down here. They just sent them back. And so in the process of that, you have all of these tribes that came down here to learn all of this evil stuff to just go back there with all of their evil stuff. And you can only imagine what happened. Now, the interesting thing is, this is also what took place at that point in time. Being a Jew was no longer defined by belonging to the tribe of Judah. It was defined by belonging to the religion of Judaism. And so that's when the whole weirdness with who's a Jew began to take place, because it wasn't about belonging to the tribe of Judah so much as it was about being a Jew, belonging to the religion of Judaism, or other practices such as being circumcised. Now, circumcision became a big deal. We'll get into that more later in another video coming up after this. But the circumcision became a very big deal. And also the following the laws and rituals of the priests and the rabbis and the Pharisees. So the chronological order, it went from priests to Pharisees to rabbis. So rabbis are current day. Pharisees were during Jesus' time, and then the priests were during this time. But that's the evolution of the priests, was they became Pharisees, then they became rabbis. It's the same guys, and they all, again, came from this Levite line. So I want to get into a couple more things here real quick. Now, ultimately, it became a religion of ideology and adherence to the oral law. So that's what Jesus was so ticked off about with the Pharisees. And when we get to that point, because I'm going full circle here, what I'm doing is I'm coming all the way back to the destruction of Jerusalem, which I started with on the end of Satan's Little Season video. So now I'm coming all the way back around to that point again, and it'll probably take another video or two to get there. But I'm trying to fill in all of the gaps in the history so everybody can understand, the real historical record of how this all came to be. And hopefully this is making a lot more sense to you in terms of why we are where we are today with, all of these things, Gnosticism and Occultism and Judaism, Talmudic Judaism. And then those that returned to the land of Judea, including the priests, Levites, and political leaders, had joined those who worship Satan. So here we go. They all go back here to rebuild, to build the temple a second time. And what happens? They're all, again, worshiping heathen gods, doing the same old stuff that they were doing before. I'm going to go to Ezra 9:1 real quick through 2. But then the Jewish leaders came to tell me that many of the Jewish people and even some of the priests and Levites had taken up the horrible custom of the heathen people who lived in the land. So this is the interesting part. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. All of these enemies that God asked the Israelites to destroy, which they never completely did, came back full circle, and here they are, right in the land of, right here, Judah, Jerusalem, right smack dab, right in the place where they shouldn't have been. It says the men of Israel, and that's kind of weird how it says that, because again, I think there's a little bit. I didn't check the that particular verse along with my other verses. I forgot to do that, but it says the men of Israel, we know who they are, had married girls from these heathen nations and had taken them as wives for their sons. And so we're referring to these men of Israel, right, from Judah. So the holy people of God were being polluted by these mixed marriages, and the political leaders were some of the worst offenders. So here we are back to intermarrying with the evil ones. And what happened was, and I didn't finish all of that, but they, at some point in time, realized what they had done. They had realized it was wrong, and they said to God, okay, we're sorry, we're going to divorce these women. But the problem is the children had already been procreated and born, and they didn't kill off the children, of course. So now you just had all of these children from these mixed marriages, and this is, just history repeating itself. This has been going on for a long time. So it just came back all over again. So now we just have, more of the same. Now the Canaanite, Amorite gods, okay, from here, the Chaldeans. Now we know about El or Elohim. I talked about that. Now that's specific to the Torah, right? So that's kind of a Judaic god there. Now, Baal, we've talked about as well, cannibal, right? Canaanites worshiping Baal, eating people, cannibals. And then Asherah, who is the goddess. So again, here you have these multiple gods here, which again continued on along with these other gods that were specific to Babylon. So we just get back to all of this monotheism or the polytheism with all of these multiple gods. So that's pretty much, so history continued to repeat. The land was once again corrupted by evil, and those who took the divine and sacred knowledge decided to use it with their left hand as opposed to the right. So that's the unfortunate thing about God's sacred wisdom and knowledge falling into the wrong hands, and obviously it has, and it's still being used to this day by those who are on the wrong side, those who are on the wrong side of the poles, if you will. So I'm just going to cover a couple things with you, just to kind of wrap up. So what was once a religion that perhaps included the God we know? Okay, and I'm talking about Judaism, because the claim is with the Torah, that was the first 5 books of the Bible, and that was Moses, and same God that we think of as we read the Holy Bible. Okay, it became something very different. And the interesting thing is the Hebrew language was reintroduced into Judaism after the millennial reign ended. So why would that be? So they learned Aramaic so they could capture all of this knowledge, stolen knowledge that the Chaldeans had. And then what happened is, once the millennial reign was over, this goes obviously, many, many centuries down the road, they decided to go back to Hebrew as far as kind of being their specific language. Now, why that is, I'm not sure, because if the books were written in Aramaic or Hebrew, we wouldn't be able to understand them either way. But whatever the case, my theory on this is, obviously this religion or language is chosen so that those of us who only understand English, very few people understand Hebrew. I don't know how many would understand Aramaic, but we can't read the books. We don't know exactly what's in the books because we can't read them. And that's done for a specific purpose. That's secrecy. That's a way for, again, Satan to hide or conceal. It's concealment, concealing a weapon. How he can conceal a weapon so we don't know that how it's being used or what the weapon actually is. But we know what's in the book. It came from here. And so then now let's talk about the 10 lost tribes. I would love to get your input on this, because I'm going to be covering this in the next video. I'm going to be trying to kind of figure out more about the 10 lost tribes and kind of where they went and what happened to them and where they are today, because my feeling is, the 10 lost tribes, there's a lot to that, and for some reason we aren't really being told, or we haven't been taught or made aware of those 10 tribes and ultimately where they ended up. So please let me know if you have some thoughts on that. And then lastly, the secret societies, the Kabbalists, and the occults largely use Gnosticism in their teachings and practices. They may also use the black magic derived from the Goetia. Now, I didn't tell you what the Goetia was, but this is the practice of summoning and commanding demons through rituals, ceremonies, i.e. satanic worship. So, all of these, the occults, I imagine some secret societies probably dabble in this as well. But there are a lot of different practices that are utilized that have stolen or hijacked what was provided to Solomon so that he could utilize it for the good, for divine purposes. But unfortunately, it's gone from the right hand to the left, and they're using it for evil purposes to essentially play God. And so that's what's going on. So lessons to learn. I just kind of want to, do this just so we can kind of be thinking about maybe what lessons to learn from this. And something that came to my mind is, if we don't eliminate the enemy in our own lives, it can always come back to destroy us, right? And I think that's just something that I always try to pick up on. What message is God trying to get across to us in these stories, and in the scriptures that we can utilize today in our own lives? Because especially if we turn away from God, the enemy has free reign over us, essentially, if we turn away from God, because we no longer have God's power within to help us overcome the enemy. And so we always put ourselves in that position by turning away from God. And some things to consider, enemies that could obviously come back over time and do harm would be bad relationships. If you have a bad relationship, not eliminating that from your life, and it comes back time and time again, and it continues to screw up your life time and time again. Addictions would also apply. Self-serving desires, of course. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with our ego. So it's just something to be thinking about, if you can identify maybe what enemies do you have in your life that you need to eliminate, much like the Israelites had to eliminate to get to the promised land. They had to eliminate those enemies to get there. What enemies do you have to eliminate or need to eliminate in your life to get there? And how can God help you do that? Because it's going to be very difficult to do it without him. And then has something or someone else become our God? Because one thing I just continue to read time and time again is this worship of other gods. And we obviously don't have these gods in our lives today like they did back then, all these different gods so much, unless, of course, we're Satan worshipers. But, we can worship pretty most anything, someone or something, So are we worshiping someone or something else in our lives and making it our God? Is this perhaps the reason why our life feels out of order? Because if you're not following God's order, which is in the book, then obviously your life is going to feel out of order or out of sorts. And if you're making something else into your God besides God, then obviously that's something that is going to play a negative role in your life, because obviously you can see from what we've read in the scripture, it certainly will do that to you. And then, can God trust us with his sacred knowledge? Can God trust us to use the right hand and not the left? So I pray all the time for wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, because I obviously need that. I want that so I can share it with everybody here watching the channel. And I understand that that is something that God has entrusted me with. And so I have to be, very dedicated to him in that regard, so that I use it, with the right hand, and I commit to doing that, using it for his divine purposes. And then the two poles, which is, again, going back to the right hand and the left. Okay, so you have, this is the divine light over here. This is the darkness over here. So this is the unconditional love over here. So God is love. This is the unconditional love. This is the forgiveness. This is the truth. These are all the things that allow us to find our own heaven on earth, and that's how we're going to build our heaven on earth, is through the light, using the right hand, being with God in this. Because the darkness is the fear, it's the resentment, it's the dishonesty or the deception, and those are the things that continue to keep us trapped in the darkness, because it's in our left hand. So if you're interested in learning more about how to make God number one in your life, how to make sure that you live a life with your right hand, and do all of the things that help you to have a heavenly life on earth, the book, I have a thing that I'm doing for the holidays. So what I'm doing is I'm actually doing signed copies, limited signed copies. It's 100 copies of the hard book, 100 copies of the soft cover. Not only am I signing the books, but I'm putting a personal note in there. So you can go to the website. This should be up and running here in the next few days. You can go to the website and you can select whether you want a hard cover or a soft cover. And then you can determine whether or not you want it to be a personal note from me to you, or if it's a gift, I can do a personal note to the person you want it to go to. And that note can come from you, or it can come from me. So we'll have this all set up so you can kind of determine which one you want. If you want me to provide a personal note, then maybe what you would do is kind of give me some information on what that person might need the book for. Maybe they're struggling with something. Maybe they're trying to find their way to God. Maybe they have some challenges or struggles in their life, so I would make a personal note about those things without it getting too, again, I want to respect the privacy. You would just kind of need to let me know what is, correct there to do. But I want to make them personalized, and I want to make sure that they're available so people have them for, Christmas time. So that's something I'm doing. If you have any questions about that, feel free to hit me up on the form, the contact us form on the homepage, godandgametheory.com. Okay, but that's something I want to do to help people through the Christmas season. We all have New Year's resolutions, of course, after Christmas. So I want to help people, maybe if there's some things they want to do in their lives, to make some changes there. So that's really all I have for now. I appreciate you being here for this. I hope this was helpful to you. I always encourage too, and I don't say this enough, but please give me your feedback. If there's anything I can do on the videos to make them better, please, I'm not going to take offense to it. I want your input. I want your feedback. I need it so that I can do a better job on my end so that these videos work best for you. So please let me know what I can do different or better. And then, of course, if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. Always appreciated. Share it with others that could benefit, of course, as well. And subscribe and follow if you haven't. So again, I appreciate you so much for being here. Love you all. Until next time, be wise. God bless. Take care. I'll see you soon.